Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with keywords that made headlines this week. President Lee Jae-myung kicked off his administration's first round of ministerial briefings on Thursday, starting with the economy, and urged public officials to put service to the nation above all else. The National Assembly wrapped up its regular session earlier this week with political tensions boiling over as the two major parties clashed over key legislation. The U.S. Federal Reserve has delivered its third and final interest rate cut of the year, lowering its benchmark rate by another quarter point to the lowest level in more than 3 years. President Lee Jae-myung presided over a semiconductor strategy meeting on Wednesday with key ministers and industry leaders as the government moves to strengthen South Korea's global standing in the sector. Our top office correspondent Song Yujin reports.
With what's seen as high-tech changing at breakneck speed, President Lee Jae-myung says the semiconductor industry is the way forward for South Korea.
어쨌든 대한민국도 잠깐의 혼란을 벗어나서 이제 새롭게 도약해야 되는데 산업 경제 발전이 그 핵심이라고 생각이 되고 그중에서도 반도체 분야가 아무래도 우리가 매우 경쟁력을 가지는 전망 있는 영역으로 생각됩니다.
At a time when the fight for semiconductor supremacy is being described as a war between countries, President Lee chaired a meeting with ministers and industry insiders on Wednesday to discuss ways to boost South Korea's competitiveness. Lee stressed the need to build a robust semiconductor ecosystem.
전 후방 산업들도 그렇고 지금 주로 논의되는 소위 소부장, 소재 부품 장비 분야는 해외 의존도가 매우 높다는 얘기들도 있고.
Although South Korea is a global leader in chip manufacturing, it trails competitors such as Japan and the US when it comes to materials, components, and equipment technology and production. To address this, the government plans to provide expanded fiscal and financial support for semiconductor materials and component suppliers. It will also launch the Trinity Fab, an evaluation to mass production chip fabrication plant in Yongin City, Gyeonggi-do Province by 2027. Another major initiative is expanding semiconductor infrastructure beyond the capital region.
For stable growth and a strong supply chain, we can no longer concentrate the semiconductor industry only in the capital region.
The Industry Ministry plans to establish what it calls the Southern Semiconductor Belt, connecting the cities of Gwangju, Busan, and Gumi. Gwangju will serve as a hub for advanced packaging, Busan for power semiconductor production, and Gumi for materials and components. So the question now is whether what was discussed this time will propel South Korea into the Lee administration's goal of the world's top two semiconductor powers. Song Yujin, Arirang News.
It's been 6 months since the Lee Jae-myung administration took office, and on Thursday, the president took part in the first briefing of government operations, starting with the Ministry of Economy and Finance. Our correspondent Park Jun-an reports.
The economy was chosen by President Lee Jae-myung as his first topic to be briefed on in the first round of ministerial briefings started by his administration. But before going into the details, Lee opened the meeting by emphasizing the importance of public service above all.
정말 운명적으로 중요한 지점이잖아요. 지금 대한민국이 그런 분수령 또는 분기점에 서 있는 것 같습니다. 우리 공직자 여러분들의 이 나라의 미래도 달려있고 여러분 다음 세대들의 삶도 달려있다. 이렇게 생각하고 책임감을 가지고 열심히 해 주실 것으로 확실히 믿습니다.
Following President Lee's opening speech, the Ministry of Economy and Finance started the session, evaluating the government's economic achievements over the past 6 months and how the ministry would move forward to bring meaningful changes next year.
The administration has pushed forward key economic measures, including emergency response efforts, a swift supplementary budget, a new growth strategy, tariff agreements, tax system normalization, and the timely passage of the 2026 budget. As a result, growth reached a 15-quarter high, and the KOSPI surpassed 4,000 points, with broader signs of recovery across the economy.
However, the finance minister did mention some hardships lying ahead. For example, South Korea's economy faces multiple challenges, including a decline in potential growth rate, polarization, and latent risks in the foreign exchange and real estate markets. The government has announced it will proactively pursue key tasks, including making 2026 the first year of a major leap forward. Starting from Thursday, President Yi will also receive work reports covering 228 public institutions and related organizations, including 19 ministries, 5 agencies, 18 commissions, and 7 committees. 박준환, 아리랑 뉴스.
President Lee Jae-myung presiding over a weekly cabinet meeting focused on promoting K-food exports, vowing to turn K-food into a strategic export item. Our senior presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
Nurturing K-food as a strategic export industry. That was the key message from President Lee Jae-myung during a weekly cabinet meeting that mainly focused on discussing measures to promote exports of K-food.
올해 들어서 지난달까지 K푸드 수출의 규모가 역대 최고 실적을 갱신했다고 합니다. 입맛을 사로잡는 것은 마음을 사로잡는 것이다.
He added that interest in K-food originates from the popularity of K-culture, and it contributes to an increase in exports, stressing the importance of promoting Korea on a global scale.
관계부처는 해외 마케팅, 물류 지원, 관광 연계 상품 개발, 지식재산권 보호 강화 같은 종합 지원 방안을 마련하면 좋겠습니다.
A special planning bureau dedicated to K-food exports will soon be launched. Other than diversifying export markets and items, an idea has been floated regarding creating a school to nurture chefs to meet the growing demand.
We suggest creating a famous Korean food school, tentatively called Sura School.
President Lee instructed his officials to review establishing specialized schools for K-food cooking classes. Other discussions included exporting surplus rice, as Lee said rice prices in Japan have tripled.
우리나라는 쌀 남아서 맨날 시끄럽죠. 일본도 계약제비 수출하면 어때요?
Also on the table for Tuesday were methods to improve voting rights for overseas Koreans, such as expanding polling stations and introducing mail-in or electronic voting, as the president instructed his officials to make sure no one feels left alone. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
On the defense front, South Korea has signed a preliminary deal to sell military land vehicles to Peru, marking a significant step into the Latin American market. Pyongyang has the details.
South Korea is poised to make a significant breakthrough in the Latin American defense market after Peru agreed to procure nearly 200 units of Korean-made ground vehicles. According to the presidential office, the Peruvian army will receive 54 K-2 main battle tanks and 141 wheeled armored vehicles under a comprehensive agreement signed with Korean defense firms and Peru's state-run enterprise. While final contract negotiations are still underway, officials say the deal is expected to become the largest Korean defense export to Latin America and the first entry of the K-2 tank into the region. The K-2 has already strengthened its international standing through multi-billion-dollar supply contracts with Poland and performance demonstrations across Europe. National security officials say the Peru deal represents a pivotal step towards expanding Seoul's global defense footprint.
K-Defense is laying the foundation to become one of the world's top 4 global defense powers. We are launching a presidential-level control tower to drive these efforts forward.
President Lee Jae-myung welcomed the development, expressing hope that the agreement will elevate bilateral defense cooperation and lead to a sustainable, mutually beneficial partnership. If the export proceeds smoothly, Seoul expects the deal to serve as a foothold for expanding Korean defense exports across the wider Latin American market. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
As we approach the end of the year, the National Assembly is wrapping up its sessions, but contentious issues remain, causing friction between the ruling and main opposition parties. So to discuss this further, we have our political correspondent An Sung-jin with us in the studio. Welcome, Sung-jin.
Thank you for having me, Soo-jin.
So the last day of the regular session at the National Assembly took place earlier this week. Can you start us off by walking us through what happened?
Right, Soo-jin. So Tuesday marked the last day of the regular session at the National Assembly, and a plenary session was underway when the People Power Party initiated a filibuster. That plenary session was supposed to start at 2 p.m., but the two ruling and main opposition parties failed to reach an agreement on the agenda. So the party leaders, as well as the National Assembly Speaker Won-sik, agreed to postpone the session until 4 p.m. When the session eventually began and the Democratic Party moved forward with the controversial Franchise Business Act provision, the People Power Party launched a filibuster in response. The first speaker in the filibuster had her microphone cut off as the National Assembly Speaker deemed her remarks unrelated to the franchise bill. Other PPP lawmakers approached the Speaker to protest the decision. The National Assembly had planned to open its afternoon plenary session to process 3 government guarantee approvals as well as 59 bills. However, with the PPP filing for a filibuster on all 59 bills, the proceedings were brought to a halt. This was not a surprise, as the PPP had already made it clear that if the DP pushed forward with any contentious legislation, it would launch a filibuster against any bill brought to the floor.
So it's clear that tensions are running quite high, and also an extraordinary session convened on Thursday. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, we were supposed to see a vote on the government guarantee approvals and bills from Tuesday at the plenary session of the December extraordinary session. First off, the Fair Transactions in Franchise Business Act was approved after it has been pushed back that to a previous filibuster. But when it was the turn of the next item on the agenda, the Criminal Procedure Act, the People Power Party initiated another filibuster.
So there's not that many days left until the end of the year. Can you tell us how things are expected to unfold?
Right, so we can expect major delays of the passage of these bills. A filibuster can end 24 hours after it begins with the approval of 3/5 of all lawmakers. But because each bill requires a separate vote to end the filibuster, only one bill can be processed per day. The PPP has labeled the judicial reform bills pushed by the DP as evil, and as I said before, the party will continue to filibuster all bills brought to the floor.
As we have already promised the public, we have made it clear that we will fight against every bill brought to the plenary session with filibusters unless the ruling party withdraws its attempt to pass the 8 unacceptable, unconstitutional laws.
The PPP is now even taking livelihood-related bills hostage. I don't know how to interpret the fact that they are blocking even the bills they propose. In the end, they are holding people's livelihoods hostage through these filibusters.
So we will have to keep an eye on the National Assembly next week to see how all these issues are going to be resolved.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today, Sang-jin.
My pleasure as always.
South Korea saw over 200,000 jobs added year-on-year in November. However, the data shows that employment among young people and key industries continues to decline. Park Jun-an has the latest numbers.
South Korea added 225,000 jobs in November compared to the same month last year. This marks the second consecutive month of job growth hovering around the 200,000 mark. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Wednesday, the total number of employed people stood at 29,046,000 last month. The increase was driven by health and social welfare services, which added 281,000 jobs. However, key industries continued to show weakness, with employment in the manufacturing sector falling by 41,000 and construction down by 131,000, marking 17 and 19 consecutive months of job losses, respectively. While the overall employment rate has risen by 0.2 percentage points year-on-year, which is the highest rate for any November, the employment rate for those aged 15 to 29 dipped by 1.2 percentage points in the same period, losing 177,000 jobs.
It appears that the recent shift toward experienced hires and occasional recruitment is making it harder for young people to find jobs. Many workplaces where young people work are concentrated in industries like accommodation, food services, and manufacturing, and the difficulties facing these sectors also seem to be affecting the amount of young people's employment.
Economically inactive individuals taking time off to rest reached just over 2.54 million in November, up 124,000 from a year earlier and marking the largest level ever recorded for that month. Especially the economically inactive population in their 30s also rose to 314,000, the highest November figure on record. A government official explained that the number of people who were previously classified under childcare or household duties has decreased, and more are now being counted as those taking time off to rest. This shift is contributing to the rise in this category among the economically inactive individuals. Park Jun-an, RN News.
The elderly population is growing, and with more young people choosing to remain unmarried or marry later, the number of single-person households continues to rise in South Korea, with more than 8 million people living alone last year. Ian-jin reports.
Government data based on an annual survey released on Tuesday showed that in 2024, there were 8.05 million single-person households in South Korea. People living by themselves made up around 36% of all households, making them the largest household category. Statistics Korea defines single-person households as one person who lives alone, earns their own income, cooks for themselves, and sleeps alone, a complete independent unit. Almost 20% of these single-person households were aged 70 or older, while 17.8% were aged 29 and under, making it the second consecutive year where the number of older single households exceeded the younger group. The increase in elderly single-person households has also led to increased demand for welfare services. With more than 60% of single-person households employed, the average annual income of people who live alone came to 34.23 million won. That's roughly $23,288. While this was a 6.2% jump from the previous year, it still stood at just 46.1% of the overall average income of all households. Single-person households have become the most common form of households in Korea recently, increasing in proportion by approximately 1 percentage point each year since it first exceeded 30% in 2019. Figures for 2024 showed an increase of 0.6% in the proportion of single-person households compared to the previous year, with the proportion of two-person households also rising by 0.2 percentage points. In contrast, the proportion of three-person and four or more person households decreased by 0.2 percentage points and 0.8 percentage points, respectively. By region, 42.7% of single-person households were concentrated in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do Province. A source from the Ministry of Data and Statistics said that single-person households continue to increase due to the population aging, the increase in unmarried people, as well as later marriages. The survey also showed that nearly half of all people living alone said they often or sometimes feel lonely. 이은진, 아리랑 뉴스.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has cut its benchmark interest rate by another quarter point, its third consecutive rate cut this year. That move narrows the interest rate gap with South Korea. An Sung-jin reports.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has cut its benchmark interest rate by 0.25 percentage points, bringing the rate to its lowest level in more than 3 years. It announced on Wednesday that Federal Open Market Committee had lowered the federal funds rate from the previous 3.75 to 4% range to 3.5 to 3.75%. The Fed's decision marks the third consecutive rate cut since September, lowering the rate by a total of 0.75 percentage points this year. It cited an uncertain economy, including a slowdown in employment growth rate as well as rising inflation. Of the 12 voting members, 9 supported the decision while 3 opposed. The Chicago Fed president and Kansas City Fed president argued that the policy rate be left unchanged, while board member Christopher Waller, a close ally of U.S. President Donald Trump, pushed for a deeper 0.5 percentage point reduction.
Everyone around the table at the FOMC agrees that inflation is too high and that we want it to come down. Where the difference is how do you weight those risks and what does your forecast look like?
Regarding future rate cuts, the Fed used more cautious language, saying it would consider the extent and timing of additional adjustments. As the U.S. benchmark rate fell to 3.75% following the Fed's latest decision, the rate gap with South Korea has narrowed to 1.25 percentage points, based on the upper limit of the U.S. rate range. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump spoke about the Fed's decision.
I mean, this guy, the head of the Federal Reserve, is a stiff. He did a rather small number that could have been doubled, at least doubled.
On Wall Street, attention is now shifting to who will become the next Fed chair, with Kevin Hassett, head of the White House National Economic Council, considered as a leading candidate. The finalists could come as early as later this month. An Sung-jin, 아리랑 뉴스.
Wrapping up the year, which welcomed a new government into office, the Minister of Unification laid out his intentions to proactively pursue engagement with North Korea. Our correspondent Oh Seong reports.
South Korea will renew its push to reopen talks with North Korea next year, anticipating major regional shifts with the upcoming US-China summit. On Wednesday, Unification Minister Chung Dong-young held an off-camera conference with correspondents, setting the tone for his priorities next year, saying he will strive to turn 2026 into a base year for peace and coexistence. On promoting dialogue with Pyongyang, he pointed to a major diplomatic event, the April meeting between US President Donald Trump and his counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing, noting that the two leaders could influence North Korea's strategic calculations and set the tone for regional engagement. Chung said Seoul must be ready if Pyongyang recalibrates its position and allows even a minimal opening for contact, particularly as North Korea enters a period of internal reassessment ahead of its 9th Party Congress, reflecting on economic direction and external partnerships. Minister Chung said the South must be proactive in the coming months, not wait for external momentum. According to Chung, this includes lowering confrontation, restoring basic trust, and signaling a clear policy direction based on peaceful coexistence, not the North's subjugation. Chung said revising military posture and lowering confrontation are part of that. He pointed to past cases, noting that the suspension of team spirit in the early 1990s and the delay of South Korea-US combined exercises in 2018 contributed to diplomatic openings. He noted here that military drills are a means, not the purpose. On dealing with North Korea's nuclear program, Chung said the most urgent task is slowing further expansion. He listed 3 immediate priorities: stopping the Yeonbyung reactor, halting the increase in North Korea's warhead stockpile, and freezing uranium enrichment. However, the minister rejected arguments for stronger sanctions or pressure, saying North Korea's nuclear and missile advances have historically accelerated during periods of isolation. Seeking international cooperation on promoting peace on the peninsula, Chung added that Seoul is also widening its diplomatic network, including asking the European Union to consider appointing a special envoy for the Korean peninsula. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Special exhibitions showcasing the work of a Korean Catholic priest renowned for his modern, unconventional approach to stained glass are underway in Seoul through the end of the month. His pieces are known for a distinctive style that stands apart from traditional stained glass art. Park Gun-woo takes us there for a closer look.
Vividly colored paint on glass that seems to tell a story or a poem. This is how Catholic priest and artist Kim In-jung has worked for decades, using oil pigments and brushes to create colors as radiant and transparent as light itself. His pieces look slightly different from traditional stained glass that's typically assembled by joining small pieces of colored glass together with lead. 2 special exhibitions, Poetry of Light and Light for Life, now running through this Christmas in 2 separate museums in Seoul, offer rare opportunities to appreciate Kim's work close up, including several being shown for the first time. A notable fact is that all the artwork on display is deliberately left untitled for a good reason. Behind me are Kim's latest artworks, which are also left intentionally untitled, allowing each viewer to step in with no preconceptions, just a pure personal encounter with the light and color before them.
I've been going through a dark period, feeling trapped. So I was finding a way to release some of that pressure, and this exhibition helped me out. It reminded me of a crane taking flight, so if I could name the piece, I'd call it Rise.
Although Kim is well known for his works on glass, his artistic practice extends to a variety of media, including canvas. And one remarkable characteristic of his work is the fusion of East and West.
European audiences say his art feels completely different from typical abstract or figurative works. The empty spaces reflect what influenced him since childhood, and he often uses thick calligraphy brushes along with vivid Western-style colors. These elements give his art a truly unique texture.
Kim's works throughout the years have been installed in around 50 cathedrals across Europe, including Chartres Cathedral. Now at 85 years old and living with hearing loss, he continues to work passionately, currently in France and Korea, showing no signs of slowing down. Though his pieces remain untitled, the emotions and reflections they evoke continue to illuminate those who stand before them, and perhaps that in the end is the very title he intended. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
South Korean director Park Chan-wook's new film No Other Choice and Netflix animated hit K-pop Demon Hunters have earned major nominations at the 2026 Golden Globe Awards. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more.
South Korea's best-known director Park Chan-wook's film No Other Choice and Netflix's animated film K-pop Demon Hunters have officially been nominated in 3 categories of the Golden Globe each. According to the Golden Globe's official website on Monday local time, director Park's dark thriller was nominated for Best Motion Picture in the categories of musical or comedy, where it will compete against 5 rivals: Blue Moon, Begonia, Marty's Supreme, Nouvelle Vague, and One Battle After Another. It has also received a nomination for the non-English category, competing against 5, including the Brazilian film The Secret Agent and It Was Just an Accident. The lead actor of No Other Choice, Lee Byung-hun, received a nomination for Best Performance by a male actor in the musical or comedy categories as well. This marks the first time in 3 years that a Korean film has been nominated at the Golden Globes since Park's Decision to Leave, which was nominated for Best Non-English Language Film in 2023. Bong Joon-ho's Parasite in 2020 and Lee Isaac-chung's Minari in 2021 previously won in this category. Meanwhile, K-pop Demon Hunters was nominated for Best Animated Feature Film along with 5 other films, including Zootopia 2 and Arco, among others. It has also been nominated for Best Original Song with its lead track Golden and for the cinematic and box office achievement. First held in 1944, the Golden Globe Awards are a prestigious ceremony that evaluates achievements in film and television worldwide. A little less than 400 international voting members participate in the judging process. The 83rd Golden Globe Awards will take place on January 11th next year. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of Weekly News Highlights. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend.